So one of the things we made us want to invite you to this show was we read your email you send out to constituents, I guess, every week or something. And this one was all about the issue at SANDAG. And we found that you wrote it in about a clear of a way as I've seen so far. I mean, I've seen a lot of people try to grapple with what's going on at SANDAG, and that was a really clearly written piece. Tell me what you think you were trying to get across more than anything with that.
Yes. Well, I do spend a lot of time on my newsletters. They're a really important way for me to continue to communicate with people who voted for me and others who are interested, like you. So thank you for reading it.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So what's happening at SANDAG, from my perspective, is this reckoning with our future. So what do we want our transportation infrastructure to look like in the next 50 years? And that's a big question. And it's something that is changing because we've been on a particular path with a particular plan that we've been just modifying around the edges for several cycles. And it's clear that no longer works. And it doesn't work because it won't meet state law, the greenhouse gas emission reduction requirements in state law, and also because there's a hunger from people who live here to have a different way to get around. Mm-hmm. And so explaining what it is that is happening and how far into the process we are was important to me, because part of it is that the plan is not developed. And so we do see a big opposition campaign from some members of the SANDAG board and some city councils who are weighing in now. And I think it's really premature, because we should let the process work and have a new plan developed that does meet state law, that does provide more transportation options than we currently have, especially when it comes, or particularly when it comes to transit and active transportation like biking and walking. And then we weigh in on whether we like that plan or not. But right now we don't even have a plan to be talking about.
Yeah. So one of the things you did in your piece and that, I value a lot around here is you step back and try to explain. And one of the things you started with was, so every 5 years, the San Diego Association of Governments, like every community, has to come up with a 40-year transportation plan. And our transportation plan has one big problem, which is that it doesn't comply with the state's mandates for greenhouse gas emissions targets and for vehicle miles traveled targets. And so what are we going to do about that? And then I think that's one issue, the state's mandates and the targets for greenhouse gas emissions. And the other issue that you grappled with in there is that we are also not seeing as much money come in as was projected for the half-cent sales tax that was extended in 2004 for transportation needs. And so those two issues combined mean we have to hit some ambitious targets with less money. And so what are we going to do? And I feel like at first the new director of SANDAG, Hassan Akrada, came in, and he was so vague about some of these issues that people could kind of see in him whatever they wanted to see, and it was kind of exciting for a lot of people, and he had a lot of support. And I feel like the same things happened, except for the opposite now, where some of his plans and comments have emerged, and there's a whole bunch of people who see what they don't like in it. And even on both sides, it seems like there's some transit advocates who also see what they don't like, but not, and some of the people you've brought up that have opposition to the transit priorities that he's discussed. And so do you think that it has been very well communicated? Do you think he has communicated as well as you did in your newsletter, for example?
Well, I think what you just said is really astute. I think that's exactly accurate, actually. And the thing is that Hassan is very much a pro. I mean, he's head and shoulders respected professional transportation engineer, leader, ability to bring people together, to have a new vision for transportation in the greater LA area. And he's someone who has a lot of gravitas. So when he speaks and when he presents himself, and he's extremely smart. I mean, when you start talking to him, you're impressed by him. So the fact that the SANDAG board chose him, I think, is not a surprise, because we did want something that was serious and would be befitting of our greatness. And I think we saw that in him.
Mm-hmm.
And so now that he's here and he's proposing things that in many ways they are similar to things that they are doing in LA now. So they are funding transit. They have transit that they're building to the airport. It will open in 2021. Mm-hmm. And so that experience that he is bringing to San Diego is tried and true from that area. And in some ways, Los Angeles isn't a great model because it's so much bigger, and it also has this established car culture even more in many ways than San Diego. San Diego is smaller and able to have a transportation network that would feed all different parts of the county in a way that's more compact than I think is even possible in the greater metropolitan LA area. So, and nobody sees LA as a model, right? Nobody thinks that that's what we want to be like when it comes to transportation. But when you look at what's happened in the recent past, their investments and their commitment and the amount of transit that they've put in after they ripped out their rail car 100 years ago, it's striking. And so I think that people are. I think what's really happening when I look at it is there's fear of change. And for many people. And then for other people, there's excitement about change because they feel that the status quo is inadequate. And so when you look at our transportation system and you see that so few people take transit, and the people who do are largely transit dependent, and anybody who has a choice will choose not to, it's obvious that the transit system we have is not providing a realistic option. And like, for example, in North County, in Encinitas, we have a period in the middle of the day where there'll be 3 hours between a train. And that's not really a reasonable transportation option. Like, even for me coming back from a SANDAG board meeting where it may or may not end within a 40-minute period, I don't want to wait around 3 hours. That's not reasonable.
Yeah.
So if we have we have to invest in not just the infrastructure, but also like buying the new train sets. So $50 million would get us 2 new train sets. And that is a really important investment, which I hope that we are able to make. So there are a lot of different parts of making the system work better. But I think all of us agree, one of the things that strikes me so much when I listen to the people opposed to the plan and the people in favor of the plan and Hassan, is that everybody essentially is saying the same thing, which is we want a complete corridors concept where transportation works in all modes. And I think the people who are standing up and saying we're fearful of you taking our road money away, are saying we don't mind adding transit, but we want to make sure we have our roads. And then other people are saying we want to make sure that we absolutely have a transit option.
Right.
So,
well, we had let's pivot off that for a second. We had Kristen Gaspar come in. She's from the area and is now a member of the Board of Supervisors. And she said, look, I appreciate Hassan coming to the board and saying we can't do the status quo. But in the interim, it meant that let me read this part. She said, it meant the other plan was completely tossed out, and now we have a strategy that's mass transit only. Do I think we needed to go that far? No. Now we have about 30% reduction in GHG, which is well over the state mandates that we need to make. So her case is that, this has been a fully transit-baked plan. Do you see it as a fully transit baked in plan?
Well, absolutely not. And I think it's premature to say that because we don't have any data points that would suggest that. The plan is not developed. It's not as if somebody knows the plan and secretly has leaked that to her. I mean, really, literally, the plan is not developed yet. So we can't say that it's all transit. I think that there's a fear that it would be all transit. But one of the things that's important to remember is that Transnet, which was the half-cent sales tax that the voters passed in 2004, its goal is congestion relief. So if you are moving 10% of people off of the roads into transit, you are creating more capacity on those roads. So having congestion relief and having more capacity for our road system is something that we all want. And so when there's an argument that says this is just going to be about transit, it really isn't. It's about looking at the whole system.
But I think part of what that's based on is some of the more intense comments and clear comments that he made in his first initial weeks here, where he said, he just does not support some of the highway concepts, particularly in the East and North County, that were drawn up as part of that sort of idea and plan with the Transnet half-cent sales tax. He's like, look, we can't afford those highway projects, and I wouldn't support them even if we could. I mean, he's very direct about that. And I think what they've done is taken those statements and said, well, if he's not going to do those, and he doesn't offer any other highway ideas, then he must be doing only transit. And he say, well, no, I actually have this complete corridors idea. But then they get him because he says, well, but I want to expand highways, but I also want to charge for access to them. So it's all these sort of, traps that he falls into or that they fall into. Those have been, though, very clear statements about highway projects. Can you really say highways will still be part of it when the leader is saying these highways are not something I would support, even if we could afford them?
So I think that what he's saying is a reflection of what state law's requirements are, which highway expansion projects, like to say we're going to add 2 carpool lanes on long sections of freeway, is just not going to be approved. So I think that the plan has to be realistic in those ways. I see this as very similar to our housing plans in our city,
sure,
where people say, well, why can't we have low density housing? It's like, because that fundamentally does not meet the goal of the housing requirements that the state has. There's just, it has to be a density of R30. It can't be 1 home per acre, right? And so it's the same thing. If you're going to reduce vehicle miles traveled and GHG, you have to have transit be central in there. But that, I don't think that means that there aren't ways to improve the freeways and their capacity, maybe around the intersections, like between the 78 and the 5, or the 15 and the 78, and then some type of a way to reconfigure the lanes that creates additional capacity. So it's not always so clear that the only thing that will accomplish those goals is the adding of 2 lanes. 2 additional, like basically wider pavement. And there are lots of things. I mean, we're doing them in our city right now. Lots of transportation improvements that look at how wide does the lane need to be, and how can we create more capacity by having an auxiliary section. Or there are just lots of little things that the carpool, the connected vehicle. I mean, a lot of this stuff is emerging. I don't think it's quite here yet, but it is coming.
Yeah. When we talk about, let's transition into this housing discussion. So Encinitas has been in the forefront of, I'd say, kind of a pushback to the targets you described, the targets the state has set about housing production, that if you accept that the population is growing, they have to live somewhere, and each city should take a burden of that, should take a portion of that. And Encinitas has had a real harsh reaction to that. They've rejected all kinds of plans that your government has put forward, and I don't think your city is fully at odds with the state yet, but it seems to be on the path to that. Would you agree with that statement?
Well, no, because I think the elected leadership now is unanimously in favor of having a housing plan that's compliant with state law and providing more housing that's needed for our residents. So I would say that at previous times we were in a much more oppositional position to the state, but I wouldn't say we are right now. And in many ways, I think what's happened is a changing understanding of what state law is and what that means is within our control and what it is that we want as a future. So there has been an education process that says that you can't just build large single-family homes and think you're providing for all income levels. And if you believe that a robust, healthy community consists of people at all income levels, then you need to grapple with the fact that we need to provide housing for everybody. And we don't have very much housing that is aimed at people who make less than $50,000 a year. So having smaller units that are affordable by design, that are those higher density type of developments, does provide that kind of housing. And we're never going to be a city that has that exclusively or even predominantly. That's one of the reasons that I've been so in favor of the accessory dwelling units or the granny flats, because we have such incredible capacity for housing in the suburbs. And that is our predominant land use. So adding a few homes here and there scatters the density and allows it to seamlessly integrate into the community. It also is much more palatable for people, I think, because it gives the value to the homeowner instead of to some out-of-town developer. Because then all of a sudden that person can provide themselves with additional rental income. They can provide somebody in their family who's coming home from college, who's an older parent, who's a caregiver, all sorts of different flexible living arrangements that I think families actually want and need, but we haven't set up the zoning to allow it very easily. And so for a city like ours, we do need to have some more high density housing, but I think accessory dwelling units, granny flats, are also a really important solution.
There was a movement and a discussion at the state. Governor Gavin Newsom has proposed the idea of maybe withholding transportation funds for road improvements from cities that don't comply with their planning requirements for adding additional density and additional housing supply, and withholding those funds and as a kind of reprimand for that. Is that something you guys are thinking about or aware of and fighting against?
Well, my read on what the governor has been doing is that when he was first elected, he did come out with strategies that were much more punitive. And I think he's softened on those. I think he's had more conversations with communities and realized that there are a lot of them that are trying to do the right thing. And so punishing those communities is maybe not the right strategy. So to me, it seems like he's really shifted in his approach. And now there are incentives for communities, and there are planning grants, and there are opportunities to provide the support that's needed to get a plan, because it's actually not cheap or quick to get yourself a new housing plan. It's part of the general plan, and it requires consultants and community meetings and technical people, and all of that costs money.
Yeah.
So I think that he's really shifted on that.
One of the big controversial discussions this year was about SB 50. This was the plan that it got to be kind of complicated as it got amended and such. But basically it said that in high employment areas and in transit areas, around transit stops, major transit stops, that 4 or 5 story apartment buildings, or in some single family neighborhoods, 4 plexes should be allowed, not necessarily by right, but a lot easier to build for builders to accomplish. And so, this was a kind of idea, the heart of the idea being that the state, that local areas like Encinitas are never going to have the political will to add supply in the magnitude that it's needed, and thus the state needs to remove that political challenge from them and do it itself. There's been some mayors that have endorsed that. Sacramento Mayor Darrell Steinberg, a few others who say, like, it's true, I can't politically handle, approving projects like that, so the state should take that out of my hands. But there was one interesting part of the amendment. The amendments for the plan took out cities that were below 50,000 people, and Encinitas is right there at 63,000, so it would have been part of this law. And I know there's a lot of people there that were frustrated. What was your take on SB 50 and how it was resolved or sort of put on the shelf?
Yeah, SB 50 would have been way too extreme for a city like Encinitas. It was too bad that the cutoff was at 50,000 instead of 70,000 or, whatever other number. I think that we do need to provide more housing. There are so many different ways to do it, and there is a lot of controversy about whether it should be more deed restricted so that you guarantee it's for people who are lower income, or whether it should just be supply at all levels, and how to get to a different housing future. So SB 50 was not something I supported, and we as a council did send a letter in opposition. I'm hopeful that the next versions of that won't be quite so extreme. Mm-hmm. So that's my position.
Can you explain as succinctly as possible where you're at with the sort of dispute with the state, as far as the state is telling Encinitas to come up with a plan? You've had a couple plans come up, But then there's also been some voter initiatives that have made it harder to pass those plans. Where are we at exactly right now?
Yes. Well, where we are is that we were sued, and we finally have a plan. The judge in the lawsuits said that we were prohibited from taking it back to a vote of the people, that the city within a certain timeline needed to adopt a compliant housing plan. So we needed to get the state to say that it was compliant, which we did. And so that plan now has been sent to the Coastal Commission. And once it receives approval at the Coastal Commission, it will go back to HCD, the state, who will say, yes, this is compliant. And then it'll go back to the judge, who will say, you have fulfilled your responsibilities. So to me, we're out of, this is called the 5th cycle. And then upcoming in 2021 is the 6th housing cycle. So I feel that we were very successful, and I feel proud of finally getting us a state compliant housing plan for the first time in our city's history. So it's actually a good place to be right now.
Is that an admission, though, that the majority of your voters would have rejected that plan if they had the chance?
Well, yes, they did, in fact. Yeah. But I think that it's not optional to comply with state law. And in many ways, I think these conversations are so similar, what's happening at SANDAG and what's happening in the city around housing, because we live within a system, and it's important that we are realists. There's something to me that seems so absurd about saying we're going to get ourselves involved in these lawsuits because we're not complying with the law, and we're going to spend millions of dollars fighting them. And it's for what? I mean, we should be reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. We should be providing more housing. The amount of housing that we are adding through this plan is 6%. 6%. It's not really that much. We're still going to be the same community that's safe, that's vibrant, that's desirable, all the things that residents want, which is all the things that I want and the other elected leaders. So we have to find a way to navigate our way there.
Yeah.
It's the same thing at SANDAG. We need to find a plan that complies with state law. I don't think we should get ourselves sued over our climate action plan or failure to meet GHG reduction requirements.
Yeah. I have a few things I wanted to go over. So vacation rentals, the representative, the assemblywoman from Encinitas, proposed and has now passed through the assembly a law that in the coastal zone, which doesn't stretch over the entirety of Encinitas at all, but in the coastal zone of Encinitas and all through San Diego County, vacation rentals would not be allowed for more than 30 days and would have a significant impact on those. Is that something you support?
Well, let me just clarify what her bill says. So Tasha Berner-Horvath, she's a former colleague of mine on the Encinitas City Council, and I support her absolutely. So what her bill says is that the platforms can't advertise a place for more than 30 days. So somebody could move among 3 different platforms, but it's a platform regulation. And then also, if you live on site, you could have a full-time vacation rental. So it's only saying it's for the out-of-town owners that vacation rentals could not be advertised. But if you want to put up your own website that advertises it, you can. It's just that you couldn't use VRBO or HomeAway or whatever the other ones are.
Right.
So we have not taken a position on that as a city. In Encinitas, we do have vacation rentals, and we recently have upped our auditing process to make sure that they are paying their hotel tax, which is 10%, that they're registered. And part of being registered is that there's accountability. So if there are noise complaints or that kind of thing, that there's a way for people to follow up directly. You have to post a sign. So we are monitoring our vacation rentals, and we want to make sure that they don't take away from housing. But we currently do have a regulatory process to be managing that. So that's why we didn't take a position on her bill.
Next issue, email retention policy for the city of Encinitas. There's another law going through the state that we've been part of informing, which is a lot of cities get rid of their emails with a very short period of time. They don't agree that emails are public records that need to be kept for 2 years. We fought a lawsuit with San Diego Unified that they agreed to keep them for 2 years. And now there's a proposal to make that the mandate for the whole state. Is that something you would support? And Encinitas actually gets rid of their emails within like 30 days. How do you even operate, by the way? I would
They just
lose my
expire.
mind. Yeah.
Yeah, no, we should definitely keep them for 2 years, and we have already brought that forward and asked our city attorney to draft that even before or unrelated to the state. I mean, the state is what's prompting it. I think, isn't it Todd Gloria's bill?
Yes.
Yeah, but that's a good idea. I mean, the more transparency for the public, the better. And it's important that the media be the watchdog of government and that we do show people what we're doing. I mean, that's the whole point of it.
Well, that was easy.
And also, I'm a former reporter, so I worked at the Los Angeles Times and the Associated Press.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And I recognize the importance of the Fourth Estate. And I thank you for your work.
Well, thank you. That's great. That's why your newsletter was good, I guess. All right. Last question about there's a big race for the control of the County Board of Supervisors. Democrats think that they have a chance, and key to that would be this district that you're in, District 3. Kristen Gaspar, who you've worked with a long time in Encinitas. She's the Board of Supervisors representative for the area. She ran for Congress, has decided she doesn't want to try that again. She wants to run for re-election. Olga Diaz, city councilwoman from Escondido. Tara Lawson-Remer, an academic and an activist. And firefighter Jeff Griffiths is running. And Democrats seem to have a lot of energy, a lot of hope to take that over. Tell me, what do you think of Kristen Gaspar? Are you a fan of her work and her priorities?
Well, I think the most important thing is her policies. So I think Kristen's a nice person, and we know each other personally. Of course, we served on the Encinitas City Council together. I was a council member, and she was the mayor. And then her husband ran against me for mayor.
Yeah.
I beat him 2-1. But
there's like a family rivalry, right?
But and she's a board member at SANDAG. But what I always look to, and I think this is fair, is how do people vote? How do they conduct themselves,
right,
and what are their policies? And I think that we deserve a better supervisor to represent Encinitas and all of that District 3. So I'm supporting Olga Diaz for supervisor. She's been on the Escondido City Council for 10 years. And I want somebody who can be really effective, like Nathan Fletcher as a supervisor has been very effective in just his first 6 months. And that comes from what he brings, his personal skill set, but also his experience at the state level, and his understanding of how to make a change, how to affect the levers of power that are in front of somebody who's sitting in elected office. So to me, it seems like Olga has those same skills. And I want somebody on the Board of Supervisors who cares and is willing to work for improvements in our community that are so fundamental. So homelessness, the migrant situation, our transportation network around the county. I mean, the votes on SANDAG, the positioning. I think it's really important to have people who say, what is it that success looks like? What is it that would get us to a plan? And I've been really disappointed with a lot of posturing and bomb throwing, because to me, it seems like we're not going to move forward unless we're able to say, this is important to me. What's important to you? Is there a way that we can find a plan that works for all of us? And so I haven't seen that from our current supervisor, from Kristen. And I've been disappointed by that. I'd like her to actually talk to Hassan. I'd like her to say, please come to my office and let's talk about how to have a plan come out of SANDAG that will meet everybody's needs. And so that approach, I think, is missing. And then there's also the policy concerns, the alignment with Trump over issues related to migrants at our border. I find that to be very divisive and not helpful.
Do you suspect that she has decided and her allies have decided that the attack on transit is actually now more politically valuable than any kind of sort of compromise and strategic partnership would be? Like it's actually just, okay, that is established. We can just hit that now real hard and gain a political advantage. Have they gone there yet, do you think?
I think that's absolutely what's happening. I think it's a lot politics, and that concerns me, because ultimately the way forward for any group, I mean, whether it's Congress or our SANDAG board or our city council is to all sit down and have that honest debate about what's most important to you, and let's find that path forward. I think what's happening around transportation in our county in the big picture is really good, because it is allowing us to talk about a transportation future that's different in a way that we haven't been able to before. And I know, and I'll just give as a quick example, our previous plan before Hassan came on, I was running one of the community meetings just as a representative from SANDAG, where we were promoting the old plan. So it was the previous plan. And there were several members of the audience who stood up and said things that were essentially like, this is so fundamentally disappointing to me, because I was hoping that our regional transportation agency would be having vision, would be looking forward to a different future, would not just see the status quo as acceptable and tinkering around the edges. So why aren't you doing more? That was the question. And I think that it's never going to be easy to make a change, because that's just not the nature of change. So expecting to have this friction around the edges and some interpersonal problems and some politics changes, to me, that's all part of what this is. That's part of policy. It's part of politics. And if you're in this business, then you have to accept that.